Free agency is in full effect ahead of the entry draft. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? And who do you need to know before the draft? Let's talk about it on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello there, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by the Locked On NHL channel of the Locked On Podcast Network, where almost all of us bring you your favorite team every single day. Erica L Ayala here alongside Rachel Donner. We are your co-hosts. Rachel is also a host of the aforementioned Locked On NHL Friday show with Gil Martin, as well as the Locked On Flyers show. I am your host of Locked On Kraken, but we're not going to talk about the boys today, Rachel. We're going to talk about free agency because unlike the NHL, free agency is here for the PWHL. We had that window open, talked about it on the last episode, and we've already seen some teams make a splash. Chief among them, PWHL Vancouver. They don't have a mascot yet, but they do have a pretty dynamic roster, at least on paper.
Yeah, and I think they have 16 players as of this recording, which like before even hitting up the draft. Like this is pretty incredible, like what Kara Morey is doing out there.
Hit the ice running, hit the ice skating, she's moving people. Either way, whatever the phrase is and however you would translate it for hockey, this engine is working, and we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the free agent moves, not every single one, but some of the big splashes, or especially with some of the players that we've been talking about for the last few episodes. We're going to talk about some quote unquote winners and losers, also some big questions that we have. Of course, by the time you are hearing this, some of them, if not all of them, will have been answered. That's just our luck when we have a show that's only once a week. And then we're going to get to some top prospects because, Rachel, we know the draft is coming up. And we're using prospects with air quotes, especially for those listening on audio, because, again, some of these players are tried and true, but they are eligible to be drafted by the now 8 teams in the PWHL. Okay, so we're not going in any particular order here, but Montreal, there were some names that I for sure had been mentioning, Rachel, a few times, and that was Cheyenne Darkangelo and also Michaela Grant-Mentis. Now, Shy Dark went to Montreal. Michaela Grant-Mentis, MGM, aka MGM, aka Bucky, left Montreal and is now with Seattle. So I think either way, Montreal getting just a solid center here in Shy Dark, someone who's won at an elite level in women's professional hockey. And I do think that, you know, she has potential to really break out in this league. I think that she was a very much a workhorse in Ottawa, and that's what they needed, and that is a part of her game. And I'm curious to see if with this Montreal team that skates fast, if she can also find some of that finesse, really attack the net and find some more points this season.
Yeah, I think they did go with some significant veteran talent in free agency so far with Darkangelo and Haley Skamura as well. I feel like those were 2 really solid signings there in free agency. And I think Montreal has really approached this pretty well, and they're being a little slower but a lot more deliberate, I think, in terms of their choices and rounding out the roster appropriately, with of course also kind of solidifying who's in net for them, because they had already protected Anne Renee Davienne, but then they also gave a contract extension to Sandra Abstreiter as their now official backup. So I think they're doing a great job so far in this offseason.
I would agree. And we talked about where goaltending free agent candidates would want to go. And so because you mentioned Abstreiter, that means that Elaine Chuli seemed to be the odd person out in Montreal. And Toronto said, well, we'll take that. Elaine Chuli, returning to Toronto, played with the Toronto Six, helped them win what was their first ever and the last ever Premier Hockey Federation championship. And I have been saying for a while that giving Chuli more significant repetitions, I think, is only going to bolster whatever team she's on, because she can be a 1A, 1B situation. I still think that she has that capability. We just weren't going to see it behind an Anne-Renee Desbiens.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely good for Chuli to get out from underneath that. And I think Abstrider can handle that kind of workload a lot better than Chuli can.
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of talked about a few other teams by nature, because we started with Montreal, but
everybody's jumping around.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of crazy.
It is, and I'm actually here for it. I'm really loving this. Let's go to Toronto, since that's where we stopped or we left off with Elaine Chuli, and they did what we pretty much thought they were gonna do with Natalie Spooner. Like, yeah, okay, she's a free agent, but like, is she?
Yeah. Yeah, that was obviously the most important player that wasn't on the protection list to get re-signed. And so I think that's a really huge move for them. I think also extending Jessie Comfer and Maggie Connors is going to be important for them. Jessie Comfer especially, I think. There's just so much change, and Toronto has been one of the more consistent teams, at least with how their new roster is shaping up in terms of keeping the band together, so to speak. You know, they did sign Chuli, they signed Claire Dalton from Montreal as well, but I think that, you know, they have primarily re-signed from within.
Yeah, for sure, including Callie Flanagan on the shoring up things defensively. I like Callie, I like her size.
Yeah.
She just, you know, does things right. She reminds me of Elise Steckline in that way, and so I think that's a good, like you said, keeping as much of the core there. And I think that I'm curious to see if Elaine Chuli does get a little more of that equitable split, as we sometimes hear in net, and if that will help Toronto maybe get over the hump in some of those games that were either tight late into the game that they, you know, just couldn't close out, whether in regulation or overtime, or whether this will be an opportunity to free up some of the defenders to hop into the offense a little bit. Let's go to Ottawa. I mean, decimated in a lot of ways, but they did keep Gwyneth Phillips, who was their star, that held them down back end of the regular season, definitely through the playoffs, and to that push where they ultimately fell to Minnesota in the final. We've seen a lot of exits, and we'll talk about those. We might as well talk about them now, because you know who I'm talking about, Rachel. I talk about Tereza Vanišová at any chance that I get. Your Nuck if you buck queen, if you will. Moving on, picked up by PWHL Vancouver, who we are going to talk about a lot. I have a lot of things to say about Vancouver. So you lose Vanišová, you lose Emrance Mashmeyer before the free agency period. We've already talked about Shy Dark moving on, Cheyenne Darkangelo.
Yeah, let's not forget about Ashton Bell, who is also on PWHL Vancouver.
And also you lose Aneta Teralova. I mean, these are key players for an Ottawa team that we weren't even sure if their coach was going to survive the regular season. Never would have predicted that they were going to get to a final. So now you have a team that was able to defy the odds. The underdog seems to have the advantage in the PWHL. But we're talking so much about the inconsistencies, and now their roster is changing.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what they're going to do, because, you know, there hasn't been too much movement. They do get Elizabeth Giguère. They shore up Rebecca Leslie. Giguère is an interesting player to me, because I think that, at least in the PWHL, there were times where I just wondered if Giguère was emptying the tank, as opposed to kind of floating around waiting for the perfect pass to take the perfect shot. So I wonder if there's just whether that was maybe fit, is it
Yeah,
motivation?
like a systems thing.
Exactly. I don't know. And I'm curious to find out because we know what Giguere was able to do at the NCAA level and has been in and out, of different national team camps. But I don't know that we've seen yet who Giguere can be as a pro.
I would agree with that. I think that there has been a struggle to find the right fit for her, as far as systems and line mates go in
Mhm.
order
Yeah.
to make it work. And so I don't know that a move is the right answer, but I don't necessarily think it's the wrong answer either.
Right.
I think it's worth trying. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
For sure. And I mean, again, I have questions. We'll get to that a little bit more in the second segment. But some of these teams, I think, as much as we're talking, and we're going to go through a few more the rest of the teams and a few more specific players, but I think we also have to ask the question on who are the bench bosses here. Because I think we're also starting to see the cream rise when it comes to personnel in the PWHL, or we certainly will if my predictions of what we're seeing on paper, wink, wink, Vancouver, are correct. But let's move on here. You mentioned Minnesota, or we talked, about Minnesota a little bit. Maddie Rooney was another free agent. We knew was if Minnesota could make a deal, they were going to make a deal, and they did. So Rooney staying with the Minnesota Frost.
Yeah, I think that was important for them, especially because, they have been one of the more quiet teams in free agency thus far. But I think if any deal was going to get done, that was the most important one. And it's a 3-year deal. So that's a
Mhm.
very huge commitment in this league.
Indeed. Yeah, that's huge. And I mean, I think it tells you all you need to know about how they feel about Maddie Rooney. We did see more of the equitable split that I alluded to. So, I mean, Hensley, uh, we'll see what that means future proofing for Hensley as well. Is that their 1-2 punch there? Is there someone young in the draft in the next 3 years that they might want to consider? I mean, we'll see. So, again, not too much happening with Minnesota, but again, I'm curious how they start filling the gaps that again decimation through expansion draft. Some key players, I mean, especially looking at defense, and they did bring in someone who's familiar to the Minnesota area, even at the pro level, not with the PWHL, but in Sid Morin.
Yeah, I think that was a really good signing for them. She's essentially coming home, so to speak. And so I think that's just it's good from a team building perspective, getting the local in, but also from a hockey perspective, I think she'll bring a lot to the Frost.
100%. 100%. Okay, let's move on here to Boston. Another name I was high on as a free agent, but also was pretty confident that their current team or their team from last season needed to lock in, especially knowing that this team lost Hillary Knight, Susanna Tapani. And that's what they did. They locked it in.
Yeah, I think that was very important to keeping things together. And I think also bringing back Jill Saulnier was really smart. I think she was a good addition to that team. And then, also picking up some additional free agents. I think Zoe Boyd, who's the other Ottawa Charge player, that we haven't mentioned yet, but Liz Sheppers, who had
Yep.
huge contributions for the Frost, especially in the playoffs.
Big time.
I think that is going to go a long way as well.
And I wonder if that move there for Sheppers, who again has connections to Minnesota, even outside of this league, is that an indication that Sheppers was like, I think I kind of proved my worth
Yep.
once or twice in the postseason. And again, and actually, I want to shout out to Anya and Madison Packer, who recently talked about this on their podcast. But like, if you know Liz's game, you're not surprised that she stepped up big time. And was able to really ice things for Minnesota twofold, right? 2 times over, key
Yep.
clutch performances. So maybe this is an opportunity for Sheppers to be given an opportunity to play a more consistently significant role
Yep.
as
Agreed.
opposed to, finding that space on the ice, just in the flow of the game.
Yeah, I think that will be a huge thing to keep an eye out for this upcoming season.
We talked about Elizabeth Giguere. We have talked about, of course, Corrine Schroeder going to Seattle. I want to talk about New York. The noise that I'm hearing in my head is like if you were to hear crickets. I don't know what's going on in New York. I do like this move, and I feel bad kind of putting these two things together. I think they're two separate things, but they're related because we're talking about the New York Sirens. They lose Elizabeth Giguere again. I don't know if that was necessarily the right fit. I also am not completely convinced that we've seen the best of Giguere as a pro. So was it a systems and a team thing, or was it a Giguere thing, needs a change of scenery? Maybe we'll find out. But I have said a few times, Rachel, that I'm just not sure what the vision is for New York. They're already on their second head coach, not the only team, right? To experience that, but it's noticeable for a team that has struggled in this league. They re-signed Taylor Girard, 1-year contract. I think Taylor has a lot more to give than New York gave her the opportunity to showcase. I appreciate that she was on special teams on the PK, but this is a power play, power forward that you can utilize. And so maybe with this contract, it's an opportunity for Taylor, similarly, as we've talked about with some other players, to get some more ice time. I don't know. But also, what else are they going to do when this is a team that kind of needs a lot?
Let's start off with goaltending, because right now Kaylee Osborne is the only one left in the organization, with Schroeder getting taken, and Abbey Levy has signed elsewhere as well. So, it's not great in net for New York.
Yeah, Levy, I think we've talked about this. Both Corrine Schroeder and Levy have had their ups and downs, but their highs are super high, and they were able to keep their team in the game. There are reports that Jinsey Rose is leaving Ottawa and signing with the New York Sirens. I think that's an opportunity for the defender to, similarly, like we've talked about with some other players, perhaps get some more ice time. And if that's the case, I mean, I think she's gonna get it. I think she'll get it in New York. Let's keep it moving here, because we want to even give even more analysis. Vancouver, I mean, we're going to talk about it. I've already kind of said it here, Rachel. On paper, I think this is the best team right now in the PWHL. I don't know that it's even particularly close. They pick up, as I've already mentioned, Vanišová. We did not talk about Michela Cava, also an absence from the two-time PWHL Walter Cup championship winning team. Then they pick up Emma Greco and Melissa Channel Watkins as well.
Yeah, plus Hannah Miller.
Oh, right. Comes home. I almost forgot about Hannah Miller. And you in particular have been talking a lot about Hannah Miller throughout this last PWHL season.
Yeah, and they had a just bonkers good expansion draft too. So they've added to it in free agency, taking some of the key role players on these other teams to kind of supplement the top level talent that they've already gotten in the expansion signings and draft. So yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that this is the best team. I don't know how they're paying for this, but we will never know.
We will never know. Show us the receipts. The receipts. We want to know. Yeah, great question. Speaking of questions, we're actually going to hold off on Seattle. If you're watching on video, yes, this is a Seattle Kraken hat. The Black Hockey History, OG Black Hockey History, inaugural season logo. Love this. It is Juneteenth weekend, so I wanted to make sure to represent. But we're going to hold off on Seattle because I think actually talking about Seattle helps us run through some of our biggest winners, losers, or biggest concerns and questions that we have, given what we know about the PWHL Free Agency and, of course, expansion draft picks. Let's get into that coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
The Stanley Cup playoffs may be over, but we are now into peak summer sports season with soccer, baseball, the WNBA, and more. There's never been a better time to see it live, and Game Time makes getting in the building fast and affordable. Game Time gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, those ticket prices drop the closer you get to the start of any game, so you can score big without overpaying. You can save huge with those zone deals. They pick the best seats in the lowest prices. And right now, zone deals are offering 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA World Cup club matches. Game Time includes fees up front and backs every order with their ticket coverage guarantee, covering cancellations, job loss, and even offering 24-hour returns. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
We ran through, Rachel, some, but not all of the free agent moves, and we actually held off on talking about PWHL Seattle because I do think that they give us an opportunity to break down some of maybe the concerns or even just the overall questions that we have. But they also give us an answer, Rachel. Who are going to be the coaches for the expansion teams? Well, just before we were getting ready to record, which is a welcome change from just after we recorded, the PWHL Seattle team announced their first ever head coach.
Right. And this is a very interesting hire. It's Steve O'Rourke, who's coming from men or younger men's hockey, we should say. He has most recently been in the OHL with the Oshawa Generals. And I think, we have seen coaches come from men's hockey into women's hockey before. It sometimes works and it sometimes does not work. And so, I really think this is going to be a remains to be seen. And it's still a question because with no experience in women's hockey to speak of, like, how do you make that transition?
It's tough. And it goes to something that I've been alluding to is that I was flabbergasted when both the head coach and the GM of, at the time, PWHL New York were being asked about rotations. I'm thinking basketball of lines, excuse me. They were asked about lines and incorporating different people. And it was like, well, we don't really know a lot about these players. So we need to be able to see what they're going to do and yada, yada, yada. Here's my thing. I'm an eye test gal through and through. And you literally are coaching Olympians. Now, as much as I can attest to it being difficult to find women's sports and especially women's hockey, if you think the men's hockey is niche, yeah, hold my beer, hold my trade coffee, right? It talks to me about women's hockey. That being said, when you are coaching Olympians, I'm gonna need you to go look at some film. I'm gonna need you to pull up some stats. And so there's that aspect. We've seen that, and that was just a little bit wild to me. It's not to say that every coach has that approach. However, if we translate what we know at elite level sports, men's or women's, the familiarity, being able to hit the ground running, knowing these players, at least on paper, their stats, their history, what culture they've come from, who their coaches were, those things you should probably look into as a coach. And I would argue that someone who is coaching juniors, so basically boys, right, draft eligible, but not NHL players, that's not comparable to women's NCAA, certainly not women's pro, and definitely not women's international ice hockey. And I am not seeing on his resume where we've seen the comp or the connection to women's hockey. And that's not necessarily just a knock on him. But the reason I want to identify this when we're talking about PWHL Seattle is because I do have some concerns that they are extremely top line heavy and that they are definitely picking role players. And yes, we can talk about players that want more of an opportunity, but given the players that were available versus the players that are signing in Seattle, my concern is that there is going to be a fall off on what we're considering your top line talent and everyone else, unless they think they're going to get that middle ground and your kind of more elevated role players in the draft, which is definitely a strategy.
Yes.
But if you're not doing that, um, but and even if you are doing that, when you have a coach that doesn't know the women's game, how long do we think it's going to take for him to catch up?
Yeah, that's the big question I have is utilization
Yes.
of players. I just this is going to be a tough job for him
It is.
because if he has been spending all this time dealing with men prospects and junior hockey, and I just don't know when he's had time to dig into this entire roster and knowing everybody else in the league and knowing how to set the matchups. To do it this quickly in a turnaround, it just seems bonkers to me.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that puts the onus on Megan Turner, the GM, right?
Mhm.
And again, Megan Turner, the GM, worked as an assistant GM with Boston. The players that they've gotten in free agency, I think there's promise here. I love Michaela Grant-Mentis game, 2-year deal. Natalie Snodgrass, someone that couldn't really break through in Ottawa, but could be your sandpaper gritty kind of player. Lexia Gia, very well known on social media, solid role player for Boston. Mariah Keppel also with Seattle. And who bridges the gap right now between what we're presuming are your top liners, your top pairings when it comes to Kayla Barnes on the blue line. Then you have
Mhm.
Hannah Bilka, Alex Carpenter, and Hillary Knight. Are we just running that line forever?
Yeah. I mean, I think right now you're looking at a second line centered by Julia Gosling with maybe Danielle Serdachny on the wing and then somebody else to be named later.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I think we're at.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Serdachny did come in the first few signings for Seattle.
Mhm.
Gosling also in free agency. Again, are they looking to fill those holes? Now, we're not done, so we don't know.
Yep.
But I have more questions looking at this roster on paper comparative to the Vancouver roster, who again on paper I think is looking super solid. And I continue to say in Kara, I trust. I've loved what she's done with the Princeton program. I almost wish she was the coach because I think she's building a fantastic roster and there's a working understanding of how these players are going to fit. Um, and and you talked about salary cap perhaps with Vancouver. How are they affording all of this? Because we didn't even get to Sarah Nurse, who's on this squad. We mentioned Mashmeyer, who's on that Vancouver squad. Almost like it's the opposite problem. And I alluded to this right on the last episode. Are we getting Vegas versus Seattle as far as the comp on the men's side for how to approach expansion? But we're not with years apart. It's in the same year that we're getting
Yeah.
these two very different approaches. I don't know. Maybe it's also because I'm the Locked on Kraken host and I'm like, oh man, this is feeling really familiar. What are we doing? But I guess only time will tell. Time will also tell if there's a new coach, a new head coach in Boston. Reports saying that Courtney Kessel might be returning to some NCAA roots.
Right. Well, with Kara Mori leaving Princeton to become the GM of the aforementioned PWHL Vancouver, that head coaching job is open. And of course, Courtney Kessel was an assistant coach there for many years. So, it does make sense for her to perhaps want to return there, given the head coaching opportunity finally being open. But leaving pro hockey to do it, I think that's a really interesting choice. And I think it's probably a very personal thing, and you can't really fault her for that.
Yeah, I think it's personal. I think you're looking at the schedule. I think maybe you're looking at autonomy and how to build a program. We've already talked
Mhm.
about and alluded to how much, if at all, I'm I'm using if at all very generously here. How much does a single ownership entity like the PWHL impact the individual things that teams can do and building out what they want there? But also let's talk about the shmoney, honey. When it comes to NCAA versus pro on the women's side, and honestly, things are starting to jumble for the men's side as well. You get paid I would argue that they're probably getting paid significantly more to coach on the NCAA side. We don't know exactly what the hockey trend is there, but again, even if the pay is comparable, or one is a little bit higher than the other, the baked in infrastructure that's even in the NCAA for women's hockey, you have to imagine is very different than a 2-year startup women's hockey league.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the stability, so I
Yeah,
get it.
indeed. Indeed. But again, as you said, you can't knock, and we see this all the time. And I love that we're seeing people talk more openly about work-life balance. I mean, again, Kraken just hired a new coach, and some people from the NCAA were a part of the names that we've been seeing thrown around. And it's like, I'm good. I'm good here for now. You know, is it a need? Do I need to do this? And what is important to me? What is important for my family? So I guess we'll find out if and when it ever happens. So what we don't know right now is if Boston needs a head coach, but we do know that Vancouver and this roster needs a coach. I already said, like, Kara, just do it. Go ahead. Go off, queen. That's would be me. But
Be your own coach.
is this an opportunity for Kara to utilize her position now as a GM to tap someone who's perhaps up and coming on the women's hockey side that, I don't know, maybe played women's hockey? Because I think that would be great. I think it's always great to have women who've been on the elite level side of the sport that they've played go into coaching. And unfortunately, the coaching carousels that we see in pro sports, men's or women's, often on the women's side, they don't include women, which is so wild to me. How can you be underqualified as a woman to coach women's sports? I mean, there are ways. Let me not generalize there. There are definitely ways. And but again, that tapping into that culture, knowing the nuance and the differences between the men's side and the women's side, or junior boys hockey and the women's side, knowing the feeder systems, being able to recruit. That's another thing. How do we not have coaches in place when the draft is coming up? Now, when you get drafted, you don't have much of a choice really, but if you're able to be a part of negotiations and making trades, and if the league eventually gets there, you kind of want to know who your coach is going to be before you show up to training camp.
I think so. I'm less worried about that aspect of it from the draft perspective because again, it just kind of is what it is, and players get signed or they don't get signed out
Yeah.
of the draft. But I think that the coaching pipeline for women's hockey is a huge, huge thorn
Mhm.
in my side anyway about how that works in terms of eleva is it elevating to move from NCAA women's hockey to the pro game, and why or why not?
Mm.
Given the varying levels of stability that we've just talked about, salary potential, and coaching experience required. I think that that is a huge topic for another day, but I
Yeah.
think that in these specific roles in Vancouver and now in Boston, I think it'll be very interesting to see who fills those roles and where they come from.
Yeah, I love that you said let's circle back to it because years ago I wrote about this when it comes to the WNBA. And then we saw a shift and the league offering more on ramps. And then that shifted again for reasons that I would love to sink my teeth into. But I do want to remind folks that this is a question that I have asked PWHL leadership before. And they specifically at the time, Jana Hefford talked about on ramps for former players getting into officiating. But we're going to have to circle back with the PWHL now that, again, we have two expansion teams, There's 8 teams total. You're going to build out a coaching staff. I would love to see Kara Mori take the Cheryl Reeve approach, or even the PWHL take the WNBA approach, where if you have a former player, they have to maybe be a little bit more liberal with that definition, but that you're
Mhm.
automatically provided an additional assistant coaching spot, so that you are then increasing the numbers in the pipeline. And I love that. So to be continued. And where we want to end this episode of the Women's Hockey Report is getting you ready for some top quote unquote prospects, effectively some names that you should know ahead of the entry draft. We'll talk about that coming up on today's episode. The draft is coming up, Rachel. Will Boston and Seattle, in particular New York, be able to fill some of their holes through this entry draft? And the answer very well could be yes, because although we are going to talk about U Sport and NCAA talent coming in, there are also tried and true professionals and international players with international experience at all ages, really, that are eligible to be drafted. And that's where, again, yes, you get drafted to where you want to go, but this is not just people coming out of college. There are players that are coming from other pro leagues. And I get the sense, even from the inaugural draft, that there are some conversations that you can have, especially with that caliber of player. But in order to do that, if I'm a player like, I don't know, Michelle Garvinin, I want to know who a coach is before I get drafted, because with as much experience as she has, she knows that a coaching staff, can really make a difference. So I think it's something that I'm curious to see if everything gets shored up before the draft, which is in days. We've got days, and how much it makes an impact. But again, the Michelle Carvinens in this particular draft eligibility class are far and few between, but maybe a sign that players from Europe who are playing in Europe may start to come to the PWHL through the draft, or maybe even through free agency. I think I'm very curious to see how the PWHL handles that, if we do see more players who are either from Europe or playing in Europe come over. But for now, we have the entry draft, Rachel, and we want to give some stick taps to a few of our colleagues working in the women's hockey space now. The Elite Prospects has done some lists. I know Yahoo/The Hockey News has had some lists, especially at the back end of last year. But the list that we're going to take a look at today are more current and up to date. And in the case of the Ice Garden in particular, and Giselle, I really like that her list offered some names outside of kind of the big names that we're seeing. And so, I want us to take a look at some of the players that we can expect. So the Ice Garden, I used to write with the Ice Garden long, long time ago, but they have 2 articles that stood out to me. And we're kind of cross-referencing this to then give you like 8 or so names that are pretty high on the list. But top 5 NCAA forwards in the 2025 PWHL draft, we have some names like Casey O'Brien, Casey O'Brien, excuse me, from Wisconsin, Ella Huber from
Mhm.
Minnesota, Ann Cherkowski from Clarkson, Jenna Buglioni from Ohio State, the Ohio State University. And then I mentioned Giselle's list that I really like, because it's not just focused on forwards. And this is the first list that I've seen, Rachel, that also makes some room for the goaltenders like Hannah Murphy from Colgate University. I think that also we see Nicole Gosling on here, Rory Gilday on here for the defenders, Clara Van Wieren from Minnesota Duluth. And these are just some of the names. Abby Newhook from BC Boston College. And then we also have the Daily Face-Off, where they had 2 of their writers. It was Hunter and Tyler come up with who they think is going in the top 10. And again, a lot of these names overlap. But, a name that we're seeing pretty high on the list, especially for the Daily Face-Off, is a defender. I love some blue liners, in Haley Wynn from Clarkson University.
Yeah, I do think Haley Wynn is going to go in the top 3 for sure
Mhm.
in this draft. Definitely a standout. Now, we know that the order is going to be the New York Sirens picking first, then they went in reverse order of the playoff results, and then Seattle and Vancouver will be at the end of the round, and they are not doing a snake draft. They're going to then restart at number 1 with the Sirens, which
You called that.
honestly, no, well, I thought they were going to do the snake, but they didn't. And that's what surprised me. Now,
Yeah.
I wanted them to do it in this order with Sirens, then the other existing teams, then Seattle, Vancouver. Then I thought they would snake and have Seattle and Vancouver pick again. But I love that they're doing it just a straight up draft order. I think, given how everything went, I think it's important to shore up the existing teams, because I don't
I would
think the
agree.
decimation was as anticipated
Yeah,
as it
well,
turned
I
out to
mean,
be.
the rules, it was a wild west out there, and I mean, we can talk about that on another episode. I will just note that yes, while the existing teams, the inaugural teams, they will stay in their order. It will be Vancouver that picks 7th or first among the expansion teams in the first round, and then they will alternate in rounds after that. So Seattle will get the 7th pick in the second round, then Vancouver the 7th pick in the et cetera, et cetera. Just a little small little thing. But yes, I think that's about as equitable as we've seen from these different drafts that we've seen from the PWHL. And I think you make a great point that with all of the movement, let's just, if it ain't broke, let's not change it here. So yeah,
But
I think. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, just getting back to one more name that we
Yeah.
haven't mentioned that I'm keeping an eye out for is Natalie Minkova, a
Mhm.
Czech player who played for University of Minnesota this past year, and she really stood out to me at Women's Worlds, and I think really increased her draft stock in that tournament. So I would look for her to go pretty high in this draft as well.
Absolutely. Casey O'Brien is another name that we've seen in basically kind of that top 5 for a lot of different lists. And, I think that makes a lot of sense. As I mentioned, I didn't go too much into that. 73 points, though, in 41 games last season. And O'Brien is someone that at Wisconsin, I mean, sometimes on the WNBA side of things, we talk about programs that not only win NCAA titles, but also are the best kind of home ground for what we believe will be a really good professional. And I think Wisconsin comes from that on the women's side. So that's going to be really interesting. I mentioned Michelle Carvinen. Again, every list that I've seen that has her going top 10. And this isn't a player that we have to remember has international experience, has played, abroad in other women's pro leagues. And I love that we're seeing Carbonin on this list. Now, there are other played in the SDA, currently playing in the SDHL, noted by the Daily Faceoff, unquestionably the highest rated player coming from the European clubs, because are other players. There are other players that have played pro. Rachel Yanis is another example. But this is the player that people, I think, are really excited. All-time leading scorer at the IIHF Women's World Championships for Finland, a team that has basically been in that number 3 spot. Not completely locked down. Czechia has knocked at the door. Switzerland and Sweden, if we go back a few years, have knocked at the door. But, Finland's been right there, and that's because of their captain, Michelle Carbonin. So, really interesting to see who's going to go with a tried and true pro here and bring a little bit more of that European flavor and experience to the PWHL.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what this draft is going to be really interesting, because there are a bunch of players not in the draft that we'll see next year.
Mhm.
So, I think teams are going to look to enhance their rosters, but I don't know that there's a game changer in this draft.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Also, just want to shout out again the Ice Garden, who did a really great job, the most comprehensive job, again, Giselle in particular, with breaking down the different athletes also by the league that they're coming from. So whether that's NCAA, I haven't seen a lot of lists, at least on stateside, offer some names for U Sports. I will be honest, I don't know much about U Sports. As far as it would be difficult for me personally to rank them. So I am leaning on the expertise of our friends over at the Ice Garden. Leah Herford at the University of Waterloo, Mackenzie Cordick at the University of British Columbia as examples. And again, list them also by their different positions. So there are also some honorable mentions from the Women's Russian League, which I think is great. We've seen that be a feeder for sure. We do know that Russia, I guess we didn't talk about this on this this podcast yet, but we do have the answer now. Team Russia will not compete in the 2026 Olympics. So that does give France on both the women's and men's side the in for the fields. And so Chloe Arard, a player that we talked about earlier on today's episode, maybe someone who we'll see compete at the Olympics, among others. We have the first 6, right, for each of the 12 teams on the men's side. Very interesting to see them do that. I'll just leave it there for now. Very interesting to see them do that. I say more on Locked on Kraken if you want to check that out. But we're not getting like the slow rollout for the women's teams. We do know that Hillary Knight, assuming, and air quotes on that, assuming she does make the team, right? She's making the team. I'd be shocked. Let's just put it that way. But if and when she makes the team, when and if she makes the team, this will be her last Olympics. We do know that. But otherwise, we just have to wait and see how many PWHL players, Rachel, will we have that I get to see play in person at the Olympics in Milano Cortina. Only time will tell, and we will definitely be breaking that down as we continue. But for my co-host, Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala here, you've been listening to the Women's Hockey Report. Please do subscribe to the Locked On NHL channel and make sure you're liking and commenting on these videos because it helps populate them to the people who want to see this kind of content. And you can also follow us on TikTok at women's_hockey_report. Again, for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala, we'll catch you on the next episode. Later days, everybody. Go listen to the new Haim album. It's awesome.